Recording in progress.
Okay, I don't have my script with me, but let's see. Approval of the minutes?
Your hearing script?
Pardon me?
I was just asking,
No.
Chair Kel, do you have the,
Yeah, that's it.
Okay,
yeah,
so.
Yes.
We're gonna do the approval of the minutes first.
right.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the April 10th, 2025 planning commission meeting minutes?
I so moved.
Maybe the second. Okay, first and second. Any discussion? No discussion? Vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Okay. Old and new business, we are moving to the public hearing. Okay, so we will open this legislative hearing and begin with the staff report.
I am gonna defer all the staff reports to Amanda Ferguson, who did most of the legwork and heavy lifting and putting them together, and she's the expert on this. So, thank you, Amanda.
Absolutely. Greeting planning commissioners. It's nice to see you tonight. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'm sure it looks beautiful in the gorge right now. I wanted to say that we are actually looking at 4 separate applications today that are before you that are all type 4 legislative applications that are specifically looking at various sections of your development code for updating. We are going to consolidate that into one staff report. So I will just give you an overview of the intent behind all 4 of them, and then walk through sort of a summary of the intent of each one of them, and then we can talk about details as part of the public hearing. So to start with, I'm sure you remember in 2022, the city hired the University of Oregon's Institute for Policy Research and Engagement to develop a strategic plan. The 2023 strategic plan that came out of that project really focused on 5 categories or themes for action: downtown revitalization, communication enhancement, code improvements, public service, and affordable housing. Many of these goals were really focused on improving the downtown visually and functionally, making the city's process more business friendly, and updating the Cascade Locks Development Code to meet current priorities. We followed that up with a technical assistance grant that Jordan got from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and continued that work to develop a downtown plan. That downtown plan was completed in February, and the major goals for that plan were to assess the current assets, evaluate the existing barriers to economic goals, and then present actionable recommendations to improve the downtown, including design and code amendments, increased public parking options, signage improvements, and other funding options for key projects. And then, of course, to do that, we had a goal of, and have now done, draft language to update or replace sections of the Cascade Locks Community Development Code to make it friendlier for both businesses and residents, as well as easier for city staff to enforce. So the applications that are before you are a series of amendments to the Cascade Locks Community Development Code that are designed to meet the goals and objectives of the Downtown Revitalization Plan. Stop me at any point if you want me to clarify something I'm saying. I know I talk fast, but we'll quickly go through them, and then I'm happy to take any questions, okay? First of all, Article 1, the first of these applications, is just a very minor change to Article 1. Article 1 includes all of the definitions within the development code. And we are recommending at this point that we change one of those definitions, which is for building height. Specifically, we want to replace the illustration that's in the code with a better illustration that better explains the complexity of determining building height on slopes. We think we've done it. I'm not certain it's perfect, but I think it's better anyway. So that's what we're recommending at this point. It's just replacing that illustration on Article 1. So that specific ordinance is a very small change. The ordinance that we're recommending for Article 2 is looking at the types of applications, because this is the section that deals with procedures. We are at this point, we want to clarify what types of applications require a pre-application meeting with staff before you can even submit an application, and what the applicant's going to get out of that pre-application meeting, because currently the code doesn't say. So it may or may not require that you have a pre-application, but then doesn't tell the staff what they're supposed to be doing during that pre-application meeting. So we're trying to give staff direction for that and give some clarity to the applicant. We are also recommending that the requirement for an architectural review committee review of an application be eliminated. This is right now currently situated, so you would have a pre-application meeting. You would submit your application. That application would then go to an architectural review committee who would potentially have 1, 2, or 3 meetings with the client. And then it would then get formally submitted for the Planning Commission. What this does is add upwards between 3 and 6 months to the review process. And that architectural review committee is not a standing committee. So it doesn't have standing meetings that are regularly announced. So if somebody submits for an architectural review right now, you then have to contact the people who are on that committee, find out when they can come, schedule a meeting date 30 days out from that, because you have to do a public notice for that. And so as you can see, it just adds more and more time. In addition, because we don't have anybody who's an architect on that architectural review committee, it's not really adding necessarily much to the review process. So our recommendation is to delete the architectural review committee, which would bring those applications directly from the pre-application to the Planning Commission after the applicant cleans up any questions that the staff had at the pre-application meeting. So that's the second of the 2 ordinances. The third ordinance is dealing with Article 3, land uses. This is where we get down to much more of the work that we were really trying to do to make a more cohesive streetscape. We've made some recommendations to the definition of the downtown zone, simplifying its purpose statement, modifying the list of permitted and conditionally permitted uses within downtown, adding the alternative to have mobile food units as a permitted use. We were recommending some clarifications of dimensional standards. And those are things like how tall can a building be? How many windows do you have to have, and what kind of percentages, those kinds of things. We're clarifying parking requirements and adding some new design standards that are designed to create a mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented corridor that preserves pedestrian scale, retains views of the mountains and rivers, references regional architectural designs, and supports a vibrant and cohesive streetscape. That was really the key nexus of the work that we were doing here in relation to the Downtown Revitalization Code. Thing is that having made those changes to the downtown zone, we also then had to make some changes to the commercial zone, because they had used the same design standards that had originally been in the code for the downtown zone, which we are replacing. So for the commercial zone, the primary changes to that code section were the addition of mobile food units as a permitted use, and then the replacement of those design standards with standards that are similar to that are similarly proposed for the downtown zone. Same thing would happen to the commercial residential zone. Again, we're deleting standards that currently exist in the development code and replacing them with more clear and objective standards. We are also recommending in the light industrial zone and the public zone that mobile food units be added as a permitted use within that third ordinance. Finally, we have a fourth ordinance before you that is related to Article 5 procedures. And so the Article 5 is really getting into administration. And we had to clarify a number of things within this code. Some of them are directly related to the downtown revitalization study. And honestly, some of them are just things that, as Jordan and I were reviewing the code, we were coming up with other things that needed to be fixed that hadn't been fixed in many years and just were probably just are no longer applicable. So one of them is to remove the reference to the outdated downtown plan that was adopted in the 90s. We wanted to clarify the applicability of provisions within Article 5, specifically to create a very specific city administrator level site plan review that is different from a planning commission level design review. So the planning commission level design reviews, which you're used to getting, are larger commercial projects, new buildings, or large new additions that double the size of a building. Those things are the things that you would be seeing still. That would be you would take those new design standards that we were recommending in Article 3 and apply them to that and review whether or not the applicant was meeting those criteria. The city administrator level site plan review would be for those smaller things that are exempt or small additions that the city administrator would do the first pass of verifying that they met those codes, because they're clear and objective, there's no discretion involved in that review. If he felt at any point that he was using discretionary standards or had to make a discretionary choice in order to apply the standards, it would get kicked up to the planning commission. So we're just trying to make it simpler for people who are doing quick changes. You shouldn't have to come to the planning commission if you're just repainting your building. And that's the specific option example of a project actually that we really wanted to clarify and fix in this process. We also then went on to clarify what those administrative procedures are associated with site design review and design review. Since we've split them, we want to make sure people know clearly how you're supposed to administer it and what you're supposed to get, what you're supposed to submit. And part of that was just for bringing requirements for the submission format into alignment with current expectations. Read the code currently right now. It says you have to print multiple copies of drawings in specific sizes and 8.5 by 11 and 11 by 17. It was very specific. And in truth, we're accepting most things now digitally. So you're not giving us copies of anything. So we wanted to clarify that. We also wanted to clarify what the submissions are for landscape and streetscape plans and for fixtures that aren't attached to the building. Specifically, we're actually recommending that you remove the requirement that at the time of planning commission approval, somebody already knows what the shape of the bench that is going to be outside their building is. It's a bit much to expect a developer to already know what their bench looks like. Following that, we are in the approval standards section, which is 8-6 148.110. We are removing the reference to the Architectural Review Committee to reference back to the change we made in an earlier ordinance, and simplifying some of the recommendations for multifamily residential structures, including removing the requirement for an outdoor area that's private in addition to a public one, and modifying some of the additional buffering requirements just to make them a little less onerous. Right now, you have to have a 10-foot wide vegetative buffer, which is, I'm not certain how you can maintain a 10-foot wide bush line. It's rather challenging. So we're trying to make it a little more reasonable. And then finally, within this section, we're also modifying some of the maintenance standards to clarify that buildings and structures must be maintained in good serviceable quality. This is actually a direct attempt to provide staff some more tools to use against nuisance properties that are not in condition that we would like to see them in. We are also recommending that you remove noise from all of the approval criteria for conditional uses, because noise is not a land use issue per LUBA case law, and it can make any kind of code enforcement incredibly challenging. So we're recommending it be removed. The big final change I should mention is that we are recommending that we change the assessed value for determining replacement of non-conforming uses from 80% to 60%. And if you need me to explain that, I'm happy to. And we are also creating a 3-tiered administrative process for variances. The code currently only has one, and the criteria for variances doesn't meet state law. So we are amending the code and proposing a 3-tiered process that actually has a staff level variance option for very small things like fence height, a planning commission, or like basically a planning commission level, or a city administrator level that is for things that are still clear and objective, but a little more discretionary, like a 5% change in the building height. And then a third tier, which would come to the planning commission, which are for those things that are truly requiring a variance to the development code and need to be interpreted by you. So, all that being said, that's what you've got before you. In other words, to focus on one big change that we wanted to make, which was to those design standards in Chapter 3, in Article 3, we had to make a bunch of other changes to the rest of the code to make sure it all linked together. It is before you in 4 separate ordinances because we're actually basically replacing some entire sections of code, and we didn't want to put it in one ordinance because then if you had problems with one sentence, we would throw the entire baby out with the bathwater, and we'd rather not do that. So before you tonight, you have multiple options. Your recommendations about these ordinances is a recommendation to City Council. So you can choose to make one motion that moves all 4 forward. If you want, you can choose to only move one forward and might make additional modifications to the others or vice versa in any case. So you can choose how you want to do with it tonight. We just wanted to present it all as one.
Okay, moving on to testimony or written comments, like, I want to.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Are we timing this? Yes, minutes. How many? 5 minutes.
I'll keep it short. My name is Cal Blake. I reside at 20251 Hoodview Avenue in West Lynn. My company, Columbia Gorge Capital, owns the property that is directly across the street from where we're currently sitting. That's 101 Wanapa Street. And we are primarily developers of workforce housing, by which we mean middle market, middle income, middle class, people who go to work for a living, housing in the Gorge and on the Oregon coast, and primarily in rural cities such as Cascade Locks. I spoke briefly at the city council meeting last week, as well as my partner, Locke Litwer, who resides in Hood River, which is where our headquarters is. We support these changes. We appreciate Amanda's hard work in, kind of doing the grind to get through all of the details in the city code and make it easier for us to build housing, which is our intention. Again, right across the street in a walkable area, you have incredible views of the cliffs and of the river and this beautiful building right here. Anything that makes it easier for us to build housing is something that we support, with the caveat that we agree that it should be beautiful housing. So a couple of things I'd like to call out in the changes that we support. One is the removal of architectural review. Again, we have no intention of building something ugly. What we want is to build quickly so that we know what the rules are, we know what the expectations are, and we can direct our architect, our designers, and our engineer to build what is needed and what is wanted by the city. So that is very helpful, those clear and objective standards. Another thing that we support is the reduction in the off-street parking requirements. I want to be clear. We support adequate parking for our residents, but what is really helpful to us is having the flexibility to provide as much as we think they'll need or as much as they actually do need. So there's, if you'll forgive me referencing my phone, I'm just making sure I call out the right section of the code that was worked on. It's 8.6.070.110. And it reduces the formula from 500 square feet per net floor area to 1,000 square feet of net floor area for a parking spot. And then lastly, I'd like to call out, and I'm not sure if this was part of Amanda's remit, but in order to create a truly walkable downtown, which is one of the things that attracted us to this community, we need safe crossings across Wanapa Street, which has, it's 30 miles per hour is the speed limit. I think for pedestrians to truly feel safe going across such a big street, it should really be down around 25 and 20, and there should be nice, big, bold, there's pedestrians crossing, so little kids and grandmas and grandparents and, people in wheelchairs can safely cross the street. and get to the beautiful stores and the view and the parks and everything that you have here. That's all. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Fabulous, thank you very much, Cal. Any other comments? Do you have anyone online, or did we receive any written comments?
No written comment?
I did not either.
Okay. Okay, so with that, we'll close the hearing. And open council deliberation. So perhaps questions of Amanda or Jordan, comments, concerns?
I guess I got one question. I was looking at the packet and all the way in the back, there's a removal of accessory structures and then a change in the ADU law. Or the ARU law.
Mhm.
So I mean, I remember us having some meetings where we were talking about changing those things, but I didn't remember that coming up at the downtown planning session. So how can you keep me up to date on how that's in there as well?
Yeah, the accessory dwelling unit in specific was mentioned briefly at one of our early meetings with the committee, but was really largely something that the city council actually asked staff for us to do and incorporate as part of this project as we were moving forward. They were going to do a separate code amendment for it, but asked us to wrap it into this. So we did. That's how that ended up in there. I'd have to actually find it. Do you remember the number?
It's Article 5.
Yeah, I had to shift to it. That was something I said, the city council specifically asked us to incorporate into this as we were just modifying everything else as well. Jordan, did you want to speak to the city council's opinion regarding the accessory residential units at all?
No, you summed it up. I mean, they just want us to explore expanding what different zones can be in.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something they've been pushing for a while, and this is a good opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
And is that in addition to what the state requires as an automatic direct apply, or does that, are we a large enough city that we have direct applies from the state for ADUs?
I have no idea.
We are not.
We're not.
Unfortunately. But yeah, I guess I was reading that and there's a few things. One, the part where accessory residential units can be used as a transient lodging.
Dave, can you tell us what page you're on?
And that's on 32 Article 5.
Will you repeat your question now that we're with?
Yeah, so there's a owner occupancy, it now, removes the owner occupancy requirement, and then it also says that it cannot be used for basically a short-term rental, anything less than 30 days. So we had previously talked about the ADU policy and wanting to change it, and that's one thing that I'd like to remove that line. That it can be used for short-term rentals, because I feel like if you have a mother-in-law unit and you rent it out, that's a pretty common thing to do. And especially if you're already living at the home, then it just makes it where you can get additional income. while you're living.
Dave, yeah, I honestly, personally, as a planner, 100% agree with you that we should remove that. Because it didn't come to a committee, I didn't really feel like I had the authority as an outside contract planner to make that recommendation, but if that's a recommendation you want to make, I would certainly encourage you to do so.
Yeah, but I'm just saying it can't change here. We have an ordinance.
Correct. So the city has an ordinance overseeing the rules of ARUs, and it does state that it can't be short term.
Okay, but if you were
So that
to-
ordinance would have to change first before it could change the code. Right.
Les, are you referring to long-term rentals or short-term rentals? You said a mother-in-law suite that you could rent, do you mean long-term?
the rent's short-term.
Short-term.
Yeah.
Short-term rentals at the state level are not really supported in ADUs, so I don't know if that's something that we have the capacity to adjust here.
No.
And I mean, I don't want to speak for council, but what I've gotten is that they want ARUs as long-term rentals to increase the amount of permanent workforce housing in Cascade Locks.
Got it.
And our current code only had them in low density residential. Didn't have them in medium density or high density.
Got it.
Correct. So this allows more opportunities for them to be built, but doesn't change the standards about them.
The minimum 2 off-street parking spaces, required, for the unit, is that something that we could also talk about removing or reducing to 1?
Jordan, is that in the current ordinance, the separate
I think
ordinance?
I think it is in our municipal ordinance.
And Brown's
And
gonna
Dave,
have-
the way that does work is whichever one is more restrictive applies. So it doesn't help to change the development code and not change the municipal ordinance, because the municipal ordinance would be more restrictive and hence be the one that would be applied.
Fittingly, I said to you, if Grandma was living in the other unit, she's gonna have her car if she can drive. So there'll be 2 cars.
Got it. I guess I just have another question. The mobile units got added, but is there a definition that got added? I searched it, I didn't find the definition for mobile unit. I don't know if that's needed. Or mobile food cart.
Well, I believe that's in our municipal ordinance as well.
There's
How
a,
do we have things in multiple places like that? How does that work? Are we making an effort to have?
Well, there's land use.
Use?
There's land use and there's city law.
Okay.
So, I mean, they should work together, yes, but it's our municipal ordinance that allows the city to regulate. Ordinance violation, whatever, land use should be dealing with where it's at.
The land use code is a regulatory document. I don't mean to be to interrupt, but it is, they work hand in hand and they are both there. You can have a separate ordinance and these ordinances. What you are doing today is creating regulatory code, and it is of an equal weight with the ordinances that you adopt separately, because this is an ordinance just like a separate ordinance that would be specific to mobile food units or something like that. That doesn't mean that one doesn't trump the other. Whichever one's more restrictive applies. So it's best to align them as much as possible so that you don't have one flipping the other. But they are both equally ordinances before the city.
Well, and I'll tell you what happened. It's because people want things now. So this is a long time process. So what the city council did was prepare those ordinances because we were dealing with those issues now. And this was going to be, quite a few months down the road before it happened.
So the ordinances that we're prepared to make motions on related to this, is there an overall ordinance that speaks to the land use code that a direct applies all of this, or we are adopting these individually?
Well, I had a little bit of question about this stuff because all of our amendments before has been ordinance number 350, put the code in place, and everything that came after that is amendments to ordinance number 350. That
The original
Set the
land
code,
use
yes.
zoning ordinance. Okay, and that makes sense. Okay. Sorry, maybe this is clear to everybody else, but just wasn't exactly sure.
Well, I suppose what council should do, I'm just thinking, is if this, whatever this is, then we can,
update the ordinances to match.
we can get rid of them.
Yes.
Yes,
We get rid of the municipal ordinance.
Because
And
that's
it is
a-
in one place.
More.
If it's conflicting, yeah.
So in this process here, if we're going through this, we should ignore what the city one says, because if we conform to that one now,
Then this won't be as we want it.
Then it won't be as we want it, and then they delete theirs, and we have to change it again to make it what we want it.
Yeah, because right now, I think the way this is how it is with our ordinance.
Okay, but if there was a desire to change and the intention was to do something different, then we could use this process and these documents to create that standard that is different. With the intention of recommending that the ordinances that govern below be removed.
Yes.
Makes sense to me.
Okay.
I wanna ask, on page Article 5, page 34, we're talking about cottages. And I was thinking of a cottage that a friend of mine has near her son's house in White Salmon that she had built. But there's a picture of cottages. So do we need a definition comparing cottages to accessory units or not?
So the cottage cluster standard in here did not change from the old code. I made not a single change in it. So it actually was pre-existing. You'll even notice that it's a different font because I didn't even change the font. Within that section, which I believe starts on page 25 of 40, and the ordinance itself, if you're flipping to that section, it actually has, it doesn't have a straight out definition, but it does define cottages through density and lot area, so it ends up being pretty specific. And this is only specific to cottage clusters. So you can build a cottage anywhere. You only have to follow these standards if you're building a cottage cluster, which is 4 or more cottages on the same property.
Right.
So you don't actually need a definition per se for cottage, because what they're talking about here is a very specific type of development that is multi-unit, but they're detached. But I didn't change this. It's actually a fairly new standard. I believe it was actually adopted I don't even think it's 5 or 6 years old. It's pretty new.
Right, so the changing of the ARUs. Is that part of the deletion of the accessory structure? Because
No. Accessory structures are just, if you had looked at the original code, it required that anybody who wanted to build a garage or a shed or like a greenhouse to come to planning commission for every accessory structure. So that specific accessory structure section that we were deleting was really trying to get rid of a separate requirement that if you're going to build a 10 by 20 structure in your backyard, that you had to come to planning commission. You still have to comply. Oh yeah, you can still build them. You just have to comply with all the standard citing that you would do for any residential building. So if it would still end up you'd still have to meet the code requirements for setbacks and sizes and building code and all those other things, including height, just as a normal building. But it doesn't call them out as requiring a separate review process, that it's entirely separate. So it's really a matter that is just a clarification. There's no reason to have a separate section on accessory structures. They just get permitted. They just get processed like any other permit. One thing it does do is actually allow accessory structures in the commercial area. If you read the code right now, accessory structures of all kinds are not allowed in commercial zones. So you couldn't even have like any kind of garden shed in a commercial built property.
Yeah, when we first moved to our building, we had one there. We got a letter within 24 hours getting fined $500 a day if I didn't move my garden shed.
Yeah, this changes that because I think that's silly. And I think generally it doesn't make any sense as to why a commercial building can't also need an accessory unit or accessory structure for some reason. And so long as they're meeting lot coverage and setback and landscaping and all of the other requirements that they're continuing to meet, it doesn't make sense to not allow them to have that option. And the other thing, Dave, if you look at the list of permitted uses within the downtown commercial and commercial residential codes now. It is now accessory structures are specifically, it says accessory buildings are outright called as permitted uses in those zones now. That is a new addition. That was never there before.
Excuse me. Michaela, look, I want to pick your brain a minute. It says for accessory buildings. I think my friend could build up to just a little less than 1,000 feet, and ours says no, not to exceed 800 feet, other than, you know, stairs, blah, blah, blah. Is 800 feet enough?
So you're talking about the ARUs? or
Yeah,
ADUs?
yeah,
Yeah, that aligns with state requirements, it's 8 to 9 is
8
the
to
window.
9.
And honestly, I live in an 800 square foot house. It works really well. You'll notice though that the 800 square feet specifically is actually living area. It doesn't include garages or porches. So the unit itself could be larger than 800 square feet.
I mean, it's like a small, but it works.
No, I know, a friend of mine built and she's got a lovely spot and great view. But I think a little less than 1,000 feet because she's a quilter and you need space, you know. I'm just looking out for my future.
Storage is always the problem.
Yeah, I know. She's got a big garage.
So I guess I got one question, kind of we talked about adding food carts in. But I'm, seeing the food carts that there's one that has come across the street from the brewery there. Which I'm excited about. I like more businesses in this town. But they got a metal overhang.
Dave,
structure.
I'm having a really hard time hearing you. I'm not certain why. You're breaking up.
Oh,
So they got a metal structure in front. That's like a Versatube. It's kind of like a tent. It's like a metal structure,
Carport cover
Yeah.
thing.
carport cover.
Yeah.
So my question is, how does that suddenly become a building that they're constructing? Does that become is that a tent? What is that? Is that I guess, where do we have any part in the code for mobile units or mobile carts where it's like, this is what you build to,
So you're talking about putting up a structure that people can then come and place mobile units under, or you're talking about?
under, so it's like, they're building seating, covered seating, which
Yeah,
I just wonder where the line is, because if, at some point it's a building. And, then it's indoor seating.
are they permitted structures and are they permitted as temporary structures or what's that look like from a code standpoint?
Well, I'm not sure. We got a call today about that canopy and I think it's probably a building code issue.
So I would
was
agree.
gonna-
This is a building code interpretation that normally your building official would actually answer. And specifically, the building code actually is what defines what is a building versus what is not a building, what's just a cover. They have different definitions for covers versus buildings, and it's typically the number of walls. If it has 3 walls, it's considered a building. If it's only got 2, then it might just be a carport. But if it doesn't ever store vehicles underneath it, then can it just be a patio cover? So they have very specific definitions based on both the use and the number of walls. So but that's not really a land use question so much as it's a building code.
Well, but to that end, if it requires a building permit, does that trigger land use action in the code anywhere?
Well, any construction, whether or not it requires a building permit, still actually has to comply with land use. What I mean by that is, say that you have a single family home and you want to build a carport on your property. You have to get a building permit for that, and you will also have to meet the land use standards that apply, which in this case would be lot coverage and setbacks. And those apply irregardless of actually whether or not you need a building permit. So if you were instead just going to put up a gazebo, you still have to meet setbacks. you still can't put that gazebo in a space that otherwise the land use code doesn't allow buildings. So if you want to put in something in the front 15 feet where you're supposed to be set back, that land use code applies whether or not you actually have triggered a building permit. There are accessory units that you can buy, that anything that's under 10 by 200 square feet doesn't technically require a building permit. It's exempt from the residential building code. But that 200 square foot structure or 180 square foot structure still has to comply with the land use code that's applicable, which almost always are only lot coverage and setbacks. But still, there's always something in the land use code that's going to apply.
Okay, so I guess my other question for mobile carts is what are the parking requirements for them right now? Cause you know, I could see a lot of mobile carts going to one area in town and then if they aren't buildings, you know, it's you know what, is that just, you know, and you have a big outdoor seating area with a bunch of tables and chairs. Well, hey, that's a lot of customers that are coming. And they didn't have any buildings, so is there a parking requirement for the mobile food carts?
At present, I was not recommending a parking requirement for them, but it also doesn't allow more than 3 together. So if you're going to do a larger pod, you'd have to come into the planning commission, do a full scale pod, which at that point you would look at parking as part of the conditional use permit.
So could you have
I mean, or
two,
a part of a site design review, I should say, actually.
two food
But you would
carts,
look at parking.
a big grass lawn, and then no additional parking? And I guess that's my question, or you know, how would that work?
Yeah, I mean, if you put a mobile cart up in an existing parking lot, you'd have to verify that that parking lot, that those are extra parking spaces, basically, or parking spaces that are unneeded. You can't put a mobile unit in a handicap space or any space that's used to access a structure for the handicap. But you could put it up cover a couple of parking spaces that are extra, and you wouldn't need additional parking that is just for the mobile unit. Not under what we're recommending anyway. And that's based on best case practice across the state. I've looked a lot of mobile food ordinances and none of them require parking for a mobile food unit.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking like, I know there was, it's like, potentially the fire station talked about putting some units there, and it's like, well, you know, they could put in some food carts, but then not have to meet a parking requirement, you know, if they put it on grass, what's a grass lawn now? Or, you know, there's some other places in town that also apply, where I'm like, well, you know, when we put our building in, we had to put in 20 parking spaces, or I think we were required 18, we put in more than that. You know, and it's like, well, there's just, you know, I feel like the need to require some sort of parking. Otherwise, you're gonna be like, well, why would I put a parking space there if I could just put more tables there? And then at the end of the day, you have no parking for the
I
rest of
can't
it.
hear you, Dave. Jordan, do you want to respond?
I don't know if I have an answer. I get what Dave's going at. It's kind of two sets of rules really for a physical structure versus a food cart. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I guess it's up to you all to deliberate.
And typically that is when you first adopt food cart ordinances, it's almost always the first big challenge. Your question is, well, why do they get a pass for some of the things that a freestanding structure restaurant would require to do? The idea being that you're trying to limit the number of requirements that are placed on what is essentially a mobile unit that is not going to be there longer than, I don't know, a year or two at the most likely. And what kind of options are you willing to let them have, or modifications are you willing to let them have in order to see if that unit will be successful? Typically, if it is successful, they'll move into a larger unit, a more fixed structure anyway. A lot of push and pull over the years. I was referencing ordinances that have been modified after a lot of experience from some communities. So most of the ordinances I used as a template really were based on places that had already gone through that kind of push and pull between the fixed and the mobile units and decided that the mobile units were not hurting the fixed businesses at all and were only helping them. And so they were trying to make it as easy as possible. But that's totally up to you, as if you want to add additional language in there.
You have a proposal or an idea of what you're?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, at minimum, you'd have one staff person and one customer, you know. So 2 parking spaces per unit, I think is like, hey. That's minimum number of off-street parking spaces that you need, and then whatever else would be on street. You know, it's one of those things where the outdoor seating area is a really difficult one because a lot of food cart pods have large outdoor seating areas. You know, it's kind of a come get your food, sit outside. Well, that's, you know, we have really strict rules on number of seats for outdoor seating because it ends up being a very high demand thing. Customers come into, you know, restaurants, number of turnover of cars and everything. So, you know, that's in the code, which, you know, it was like 1 space for 250 square feet of restaurant seating area. Well, I can imagine if you have a, you know, 2,000, 3,000 square foot outdoor seating area in the summertime, that could be, you know, 40, 50 cars that are coming that, hey, I don't have to pay for parking for, but, you know, that's just my concern. It's just the ability to scale the amount of customers you could have without,
So,
which would have a huge impact on the rest of the parking in a downtown zone. But you're not having to provide any parking, you're just,
but I think there's a timing piece that maybe is nuanced in that where food cart can handle like 2 orders at a time, right? Maybe
Yeah.
3. So you're anticipating potentially 3 different groups of people, maybe 2, right?
Yeah.
That are there doing their thing, right? And then maybe they eat there, maybe they take it to go, right? So if the math and that is included in what has been vetted, I think it's a different level of impact than what the
Yeah.
calculations that you had to do for the rest of
Right,
which
yeah.
totally makes sense. Because you're parking, you're coming in, you're being served, it's a different environment. And it may not be fair, right? But I
Yeah.
think that there's a different level of calculation that needs to be looked at, and I don't know what that is, but if it's something that's been vetted by other communities, I mean. If we don't have to reinvent the wheel on that, maybe we identify with what the suggestion is and then look to modify if we need to.
yeah,
Realistically, we should be doing this process a lot more often than we are, sort of
Yeah.
diving into this, so if this is something that we need to do more frequently, then maybe
Yeah.
that's what we do.
yeah, no, I think that's good, I think. You know, I do see like the carts in Troutdale and there's more in Gresham area, and they do have huge parking lots for those.
Yeah.
Now, they do have a huge indoor area as well.
With bars
but it's
and
like,
things
yeah,
to
but-
meet people there, it's
Yeah,
yeah,
but I see that there is a need for parking in these locations.
Yeah.
So it's like, we just need to make sure that. You know, we're,
and I think I would argue to use your same sort of logic as I see it, that like Troutdale food truck, food carts. They function more like a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
Like you go and you just get to pick what you want and then you sit down and eat, right?
Yeah.
So the cars are needed to be there because they're functioning like that. It's not a little pod of 2 or 3 where you pick them up and go, or, you know, and the other thing that hopefully we can look to start including in this is like. Community members walking or taking their bikes and like,
Yeah.
what would that look like if we started to really support that level of transportation and movement? Be great.
Yeah.
Maybe that's ideal.
yeah, no,
Realistic. Yes,
Well, I am playing catch up in all of this.
Yep.
But, I am for more parking spots, but just looking at dimensional requirements.
okay, tell us what page you're on.
I'm
'cause I'm
on
trying to
page,
check.
article 3, page 52. Light industrial zone. Talks about mobile food units are added into here. Dimensional requirements, maximum coverage of buildings and impervious surfaces shall not exceed 85% of the total lot area. We would therefore need to define a lot area for a food cart, right?
So the lot area, I think generally refers to like the parcel size. So what you're looking
So
at,
the
if
entire
it's
parcel size of the entire,
like the legal parcel size is how I would interpret that. So if it's an acre, it's an acre, and if you have 30% lot coverage requirements or limitations, then you would have to be. 70% each state open or vice versa.
right.
Is that
So-
how that's intended to be interpreted?
If you have a 30%, yeah, if lot coverage is 30%, then, and you have an acre, then yes, you would be looking at something like a 12,000 feet maximum of the lot. 1/3 of the lot could be covered basically with structures, and the rest of it cannot be.
Okay, tell me what you are because I'm.
52, Article 352. I'm about
52.
This fucking is that.
This really honestly would make so much more sense if it were one big code that you were looking at, and the piecemeal start part is kind of hard, but.
I was bringing it up more as a, like. Things that'll have to be considered if we're looking at adding parking spaces to the code, that there's gonna be little bits and pieces here and there.
So I just want to make one statement that when you're adding parking requirements to something that is designed, the intent of it be that it's really a low threshold for entry. Parking is expensive to build. And if somebody's coming onto what is already a gravel lot, if you do add parking, I would be thoughtful on whether or not you're going to require that they pave that parking, because it's not a permanent use. And yet, if you state that they have to meet parking standards, then it would have to be paved, and it can be upwards to, $10,000 to pave a couple of parking spaces. So you're just adding an additional requirement onto what is supposed to be a really low threshold entry point for a new business. So it's one of the reasons why so many places have not required them for 1 or 2 or 3 food carts, but then do start requiring them for the larger pods, like you're talking about in Troutdale, that have a lot larger impact.
The food cart is something that you stop by as you're strolling through town. Kind of like what you were saying, like a restaurant is something that you plan on going to. Drive or walk to, you sit down and eat, whereas a food cart's like, oh, we've been walking for 3 hours, look.
Grab and go.
Grab and go.
Perch and eat, yeah.
As much as it pains me to say, because I do want to see more parking, those things expand as a.
Yeah, parking, I think, parking is a huge barrier to entry, and I think for the most part. Trending wise, at least from what I have anecdotally been able to gather, parking requirements seem to be reducing.
Yep.
There's a trend towards not requiring so much, and I think the hope is that we're constructing and building things in a way that they are more accessible without a car.
Public transportation.
Public transportation, walking, biking, all the things, like you have one car per family, like, maybe that's not realistic and we're not there yet, but like the ADUs and the food trucks, I think those are both things that need to be a low barrier to entry. I'm even concerned that there's a 2 parking spot requirement for ADUs. Does that align with state statute level requirements? It's more parking?
Yes, it's more parking than the state is recommending, but honestly, the state can't force you to follow their standards because
No.
Cascade Locks is smaller than their threshold, but
But for
the
example,
state's recommending no parking requirements for ADUs.
the river, is triggered under those standards, and they had to remove their parking standards.
Yeah.
So, we should be mindful of that.
I guess parking wise, like, I saw that there was a change that in the downtown zone that. Off-street parking is going from 1 space per 1,000 square feet to. This is on. Let's see.
Yeah.
Page number 14, Article 314.
3:14.
Which. Previously, we had a whole chart of all the different uses. So I guess did that original chart that we used to use go away, or is? Am I
Yes.
reading this, okay, so the chart went away, so now we're just going to 1,000 square feet per.
Right.
Okay, so,
This is, as was mentioned during your public hearing, a change that is actually, it's basically, it used to be one space per 500 square feet, and we're recommending one per 1,000. It is a change. This doesn't remove anything that's in Article 4. I don't know what's in Article 4. I actually had to pull up Article 4 to decide, see if that parking standard chart is still there. But this really, most of the standard before was 1 in 500, and it is now recommended to go to 1 in 1,000. And you know, the other difference here is that the current standard is 1 in 500 gross, and this is 1 in 1,000 net. So it is reducing the parking requirement by half, and actually a little bit more than half, because the difference between a net and a gross is that under gross, you count everything, basically exterior walls in. Net floor area, you're removing areas that are not occupied, like staircases, elevators, storage rooms, HVAC shafts, and mechanical rooms from that floor area coverage. So it actually is, this is a benefit for the property owner, and does reduce the number of spaces they're required to have.
That our 86.108 says inside square footage, it doesn't include exterior. So that the other day.
So, but a shift, so yes, that it may right now include that she's saying to measure in from the exterior walls and it's to the benefit, so it gives you more space to count.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
so I guess our building, which everybody was having a heyday with on online comments a couple days ago, complains about not having enough parking. We're at 20 spaces, the requirement, I think
With this would be 10.
with this would be 9. So it'd be half of what we built, which I think we actually were above the required number of spaces, because the restaurant seating was 250 square feet per area, but then you could say, well, that's the restaurant seating area, the brewery was 1 per 1,000, so that was 2. So I don't
Yes.
think-
Your standard was much more complicated and would have required you to build more parking than would be required under the new code. However, it doesn't prohibit you from building as much parking as you can. For your business, you could have chosen to build a lot more than 10 parking spaces, and build all 20, but you would have only been required to build 10. If you look at the vacant lots that are left on Cascade Locks of Main Street on Manapa, the lots are small enough that if you required them to have 1 space for every 500 square feet, I couldn't figure out a footprint that was more than a coffee shack on any of them, because the parking lot requirement would have taken over half of the lot. So this is intentional reduction on the number of required on-site parking spaces intentionally to allow those lots to be developable in the future. This is, of course, paired with a concept that the city is going to be looking at developing a parking plan for public parking lots. So it was never intended to be a one-size-fits-all fix. It's also with the expectation that the city is going to move forward with developing public parking lots.
Chair, I had a question on that. As Amanda mentioned, we are looking at adding public parking, taking some of those private parking lots or vacant lots, turning them into public parking. In that same paragraph, it mentions if the city finds substitute parking reasonably satisfies parking requirements. Let's say we place a public parking lot next to the old Chinese restaurant. What is that distance to a business it could equate to? I mean,
That's great, yeah.
if is that too far to be attached to Thunder Island? Or, I mean, what is that distance to where it's become reasonable? Or is that something that's up to interpretation?
That is a discretionary choice of the Planning Commission.
Okay.
And honestly, I have seen a number of different codes that attempt to give you a specific number for how far your offsite parking can be, and I don't think it's reasonable because they never define if that's a straight line, if it's a direct angle. I mean, where is it, how the pedestrian is walking, the best corridor. I think in this case, this is reasonable to make that a discretionary choice because they can either meet the minimum on site or they can ask the planning commission for a modification to that and make an argument.
Yeah, you might be able to rent out some of your spots, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But
you
I'm
might be
also
able to.
concerned about more businesses going in, and there being also less spots than there currently are. And then street parking gets even more, worst case scenario, city doesn't figure anything out for 5-10 years, more businesses come in.
Yeah.
And then the already existing complaint from a lot of people in town is just gonna get worse without. It's like, well, we need to provide the parking spaces for all the customers that are coming. And if you just get a loophole into, well, I don't have to provide customer parking anymore,
Yeah.
then you're like, well, now the burden is falling on somebody else.
Yeah,
Okay.
and maybe.
We are not exempting all customer parking though. Doesn't go to the extreme that something like Tualatin or Portland did and eliminate all parking requirements.
Yeah, I think we all understand that people are gonna have to drive to Cascade Locks, and they gotta park somewhere. So, people bus here, but it's very few.
Well, and there isn't anything worse than a local person having cars parked in front of their house. I can think of somebody on a side street, and then they park in front of their driveway, so they can't even get their own car out. That disrupts people that are local here.
Yeah.
Terrifically. I wrote down the word enforcement, Amanda. How do you enforce people to not just leave their car and go for a hike for a day?
So the downtown revitalization plan actually has a number of different parking options. And it basically has a scheme for how to deal with parking. This fixing the code is one part of that. Modifying some of those, that Chinese restaurant parking lot as an example into a public parking lot is one part of that. One of the other pieces that we are recommending is that you actually have some area signage that basically makes the residential parking stay residential. So that you would actually have residential only parking and you could actually issue even permits for that. Enforcement of any kind of signage, parking or fines or even just meters eventually would really need somebody being willing to enforce it. One option for that we presented was to actually do something that Albany does, which is fascinating. Their downtown group, their Main Street, actually does the parking enforcement, and they take a portion of the proceeds from tickets and from permits in order to run their program. So it's a win-win for the city because the city didn't have to hire anybody to do parking enforcement, and they also make some money, and they also talk and work with the businesses to figure out where the best parking scenario is as part of that relationship. So it's actually a win-win-win across the board. So that's what we're recommending. So yes, I recognize that we don't want to push commercial parking out into the residential areas. We need to make space for commercial parking in the commercial areas, as well as preserve the residential. And so you've got to basically do all of those things in sort of an order. Actually putting in eventually any kind of metered parking is long-term though. We're not recommending that anytime soon in Cascade Locks. If you really count numbers right now, there is no parking problem in Cascade Locks. In part, it's more of a perception because there's a very hot area near Thunder Island where everybody wants to be, and that area is the most conflicted. If you stretch it out, there's lots of parking. It's just that people, I hate to say, have a walking problem. We don't really have a parking problem, we have a walking problem. I did want to mention that one of the public comments was regarding crosswalks on Wanapa and speed limits. Those two factors are not something that we can really address directly in the development code. They need to be part of the TSP refinement plan that is also going to be ongoing in this fall.
That was gonna comment on that, to your point, we have a TSP starting in the fall, and that is one of the main topics is parking, speed limits, crosswalk signs on Wanapa and Forest Lane.
Is that in conjunction with the school district?
Yes, yeah, so their Safe Routes to Schools project they're wrapping up, we'll take that and feed it right into our TSP.
And this development code modifications also will feed directly into the TSP with the intent of those things all working together.
What'd you say?
I think I said that, Megan's program will have the school piece of it.
Yes,
And then the TSP plan as it exists is gonna be updated as well.
yes. Well, the one we
Yeah,
currently
it's
have is
gonna
25 years old and it's a paperweight and it's garbage. We're starting from scratch.
Okay.
We're going brand new.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know when ODOT went through and like repaved or resurfaced, and then they like came out and they had all of the crosswalks, and I think it sounds like someone made a mistake, but they were everywhere, and I was like, this is amazing.
Right, it was,
And then they took them down, and I'm like, somewhere in between what we have and what they had.
Yeah.
Would be desired, and I know they have calculations for that, but like, more is better.
Yes. And I think it's not so much, I mean, yes, the amount of crosswalks would increase would be good, but I think it's having those flashing lights, the safety barriers to along with the crosswalks, I think is the more important part to me at least.
Areas.
Yeah, the key areas in the main hotspot downtown in front of the school,
Yeah.
hopefully down on this end as we continue growing.
Yeah, it would slow people down coming off the freeway,
Yes.
right? Like it would trigger them right there, especially if we wanna have residential use and other
Yep.
things, yeah. That's great. Any other thoughts or comments? Yes.
Chair, I have two questions, and these were actually brought up by council when they were discussing the approving the zoning map change earlier this month.
Okay.
And these are for Amanda. The first one is daycares. Are those permitted in the downtown zone?
Well, let's pull up the code.
I could not remember.
Sorry, I'm pulling it up because after years of doing this, it's always best to actually quote it directly rather than trying to do it from memory. Never a good idea.
Adult
Adult
daycare.
Adult daycare is specifically listed. Child daycare is not specifically listed. Family care daycare are listed, but at present, daycare is not listed as an outright use. It certainly could be added if that is a preference. I would love the Planning Commission's recommendation on that. If you wanted to add a daycare, specifically, whether or not you would want to add it as a conditional use or an outright use. My experience with daycares are typically not in commercial areas. They can be, but they frequently are not located, and again, I didn't even look at the residential areas as part of this code amendment. So we're only looking at the commercial and downtown zone. Whether or not you think having a commercial daycare would be a good thing in downtown, we need more daycare, so I can see that as being great. Typically, though, they are conditional, and then you would place some conditions on them, particularly about playgrounds and things like that. Again, totally optional as to whether or not you would want to do that.
I would vote yes.
As a conditional use.
It's a conditional use.
In both the downtown
not-
and commercial zones?
Yeah, excuse me, Amanda, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I've seen daycares in main floors of downtown buildings in Portland. The main.
Yeah,
floor
they're
has a
allowed
daycare.
in the neighborhood commercial zones in Portland. They're not allowed in the commercial zone, but they are allowed in the neighborhood commercial, which is pretty much what Cascade Locks is. It's all neighborhood commercial. So it's certainly reasonable. I mean, certainly you could add it even as a permitted use if you wanted to, which would make it a lot easier.
Yeah, moms want their babies close if they're brand new babies, and who knows what will happen in Cascade Locks in the future.
What was the second question, Jordan?
Mixed use apartments, there's a question about the requirement of the bottom floor having to be residential, or not residential, commercial. And then above it could be residential, and how does that fall in apartments versus duplexes versus quads?
Right.
Where does that lie? I think that was one of Cal's questions at that previous meeting.
Yeah, so mixed use apartments are specifically called out as permitted uses, and that's above, below, or behind a commercial use. But so are multifamily dwellings. So in this case, I'm looking at the permitted use for downtown, and I is mixed use apartments and J is dwelling multifamily. which would basically be an apartment structure that doesn't have any commercial use in it at all. So basically, you have the gauntlet of that type of multifamily residential would be applicable. What is not allowed, if you'll notice, is significantly absent in this list of permitted uses is single family homes and duplexes. So you can have multifamily, which is 3 or more, but you cannot have any single family. And that is why the mixed use is also in here, because that means that you could have a commercial building with 1 apartment above it. But if you're going to build a building that's all apartments, you have to have a minimum of 3. Does that make sense? That's what the difference is, why there's still mixed use apartments here, because you don't have to have more than 1 and still be mixed use. But if you're doing multifamily dwellings, you have to have a minimum of 3. So single family residential and duplexes are not allowed in the downtown or commercial zone. And that's intentional.
Thank you.
Okay, another question, looking at the ordinance, so I don't know which article this is. But it says, page two, no, it's in the ordinance, page 746. That gives me that careful.
The bigger one.
8-6.148.040.
You said, what page are 46, that 7?
That's Article 5.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
A1B. We've crossed out using an engineering seal. I know you mentioned that things are digital, and so I'm wondering if maybe that got taken out for that. But is there an engineer mentioned elsewhere somewhere that I missed, or are we just?
Is it engineering scale?
Yeah, it's engineering scale.
Scale. No, that's our.
Yeah, we're
Still need to be stamped by an engineer.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't know if you guys have used architectural and engineering scales. They're very specific types of rulers that unless you're hand drawing, you don't even use anymore. I mean, because you're doing it all in CAD. But nobody's really using it. But an engineering scale is the ones that go 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 30, 1 to 50. Whereas the architect's scale is the one that's going 1 to 1/2, 1 to 1 inch, those types of things. So I was just removing the references because they're out of date.
I thought if someone spelled seal wrong and had an E in the end of it, but I'm like, I don't need an engineering seal. No.
Good catch. Should we discuss the daycare? Did we decide that we're interested in moving that to conditional use?
Or permitted use. Which one was the?
Taylor, do you wanna vote?
Or we can vote, we can discuss it more. Does anybody else have any thoughts on it?
I like the idea of allowing more, opening up more options for daycare.
Okay. Dave, you have any
I
thoughts?
agree, I think it's great.
I think that if we do it, it should be conditional use so that there's an opportunity to provide specific site. Limitations or requirements
Sure.
under conditional use piece.
Kind of tailor it a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a higher, there's more discretion.
I will
So-
add that I do want to point out that the only 2 conditional use permits that I have ever seen fail in a public hearing were both for daycares. Because the neighbors all came out against it. So because of this noise of children. So making it a conditional use does make it a public hearing, and it is up to you as to whether or not you think that's a good or a bad thing. If you make it a permitted use, there still might be a public hearing regarding the actual development, but the neighbors would not be able to argue that they don't want it there just because they don't want it there. Whereas a conditional use, they can actually argue that they don't want it there just based on the use.
Based on the use and based on standards not being met as they pertain to the decision.
Or they can just basically, literally the ones that collapsed that I saw were based on noise. which is also actually one of the things that I'm recommending be removed from your current code, because currently the code actually allows noise as one of the conditions that is a threshold for approval. So daycares often cause a lot of children laughing and playing, and they can be noisy.
Related to daycares, are you aware of direct apply state level statute in residential areas that don't even require?
Yeah, if you have it under a certain number of children, certainly they're approvable. But like again, I didn't modify the residential zones. They're actually already allowed in the residential areas. This is only in discussion around the commercial and downtown zones. So that automatic exemption for them in residential areas does not apply to downtown.
But just thinking of where they're already allowed without any barrier and what that looks like as far as additional zoning that we have. Yeah.
But if we're removing noise as a option, doesn't that take away any leg they were standing on to argue against it?
I mean,
It would take away most of it.
yeah, I mean, it opens it up, right? There's discretion. It's just the nature of it, but it feels like the type of a use that you would want to be able to look at and review more closely and not just have it be something that it's explicitly allowed. So I think in my opinion, I think that's a conditional use, but I'm happy we can vote on it.
I'll make a motion that we allow childcare facilities as a conditional use in downtown areas.
And in commercial areas as well, both zones?
Commercial areas, yeah, as well, excuse me.
Second, okay, discussion? Already had it, okay, vote.
I
Aye, okay. So let's add it. Can we make that a modification, please?
Yes, we can make that to the proposal that goes to City Council, presuming that you also pass a motion that recommends approval to City Council of these ordinances.
Okay. Were there any other questions or comments that came up? Okay.
I don't have any.
Anything else that we would like to discuss?
have a couple of things.
Yep.
Refresh my memory, in the heavy industrial area, are food carts allowed? I don't think they were, but I couldn't remember.
We did add them in light industrial,
Yeah, I know, but not in heavy industrial.
but not in heavy. You don't have very much heavy industrial in this city.
I
Very,
know.
very small amount.
Ever did, and those
Yeah.
guys
So,
buy something from a cart.
yeah. And I don't know that there's much call for having food carts in the heavy industrial if you have them
Okay.
in the light industrial.
Well, then let's just forget it. Then, when we change things from one owner to another owner, it says unless otherwise prohibited in the development area or development permit, it shall apply to the property and may be transferred to a new property owner. Do we have any money that we ever assess people to transfer any development thing? It's on a lot of our things here. Do we ever charge anything
For the development permit.
for the development? I mean, say somebody got a development permit and then they sold the house
Yeah,
and somebody else came and bought it
and they wanna do the same
and
thing.
they wanna do the same thing. Do you ever charge
Like a
anybody?
change of use?
Is there any
Change of
exchange of money?
occupancy.
Well, we don't do occupancy, so it's a building permit issue.
But like
Building.
with the lens of land use, not occupancy like a permit to inhabit the space, occupancy with the lens of this new human is doing this business in this space.
The way it was before was change of use. It had to be, there were certain variations that made it would determine whether that person would have to go through site plan review. If Dave sold his business and somebody came in and they're doing that same business,
Yeah.
there would be currently no change of use.
Right. And you're talking about a building code issue that actually talks about the actual use of the structure. So if you went from a retail structure to a restaurant, that would trigger a change of use under the building code and maybe potentially under land use or maybe not, depending. But I think what you were discussing, Commissioner, was actually whether or not a conditional use permit, if there's another charge that does the city get any money to see a conditional use permit change hands or something like that, or an ongoing site design review that's been approved, and if it changes hands? That is not typical that you would double dip to cover the costs of that. And honestly, I think it would be almost more cost to actually go out and get those funds than you probably would get from it. So as a staff burden, it would be huge. The only time that person would have to pay additional fees is if they made a change to that approval or wanted to modify the conditions that were placed originally and didn't want to meet them, then they'd have to come back to you to modify them anyway and pay for the fee.
Amanda, I just wanted to tell you that, I appreciate you taking the noise from the neighbors out of the whole kit and caboodle, but you know what? That's what people are gonna come to the planning commission to complain about.
I know.
Yeah, that, people are gonna talk about noise, you're gonna have a band there, and I live like 200 feet away and blah, blah, blah.
Trust me, I know. I did code enforcement for 20 years. I know how many people complain about noise.
About the
But it
noise.
is one of the reasons why I'm really encouraging that you remove noise as a land use decision, because when it goes up through the courts, and it's actually one of the reasons that if you deny something based on noise, it almost always gets remanded. LUBA does not consider noise to be a land use issue. So it's best to just remove it. And although you may still hear the complaints, you can just say, I'm sorry, that is not a land use issue. However, municipal code does establish noise thresholds that have a quiet time at which you're not allowed to run mechanical, et cetera, et cetera. So you do have a municipal code that does prohibit excessive noise after a certain time period. That becomes an enforcement issue with your police or with through other aspects of your city, but not land use.
But that's my other thing, is the enforcement.
Yeah.
Reading through all of this, I thought, noise is out, thank God. Enforcement is gonna be, people are gonna come in and they're gonna say, well, he parked there 8 hours and he only was supposed to park 5 or whatever. I think it's gonna put a little pressure on the city to have that enforcement officer.
Yeah, the city's gonna have to commit significant resources.
Right, I think we should have enforcement, but we also have people who are, the guy next door is building and he's got a lot of stuff in our land. That's okay, because my husband loves Phil Nolan, he played basketball for him and he loves him almost as a son. But two things, it's gonna be the noise and it's gonna be the enforcement of people are gonna come in and complain about. And I just saw that a lot through here. Let me say a third thing, and I wrote that down on a piece of paper here. Oh, when we have facilities that have wireless and electricity and towers and all that, I wrote down, what about the health to humans? And I don't know, I can see the expression on your face. We don't know if you live.
We don't know. And
We don't know
honestly,
if-
the science has gone all different directions on that over the years that I have worked as a land use law. So I would not make that a land use issue unless you can prove positive that it is actually a health thing. And then if it is, it's actually a different agency at the state level that even takes care of it. It's not something that DLCD would expect you to address within your development code. It is something that can be a public health issue and potentially if you really want to make the case, but it's rather challenging. And I don't know.
But it might be if we ever got some kind of electric business here in town, it might be an issue for people to say that's gonna affect my health if it's next door to me.
Like the data.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, people thought using a microwave was actually going to cause cancer too. So
Yeah, right, yeah. But I think Wow, somebody did a lot of work, Kathy, to get all this together.
Well, I guess the other piece I'll say to, you know, some of your comments are that they're valid and absolutely appropriate, but this is the venue. This
Yeah.
is the opportunity for the public to provide comments and feedback. And thank you for your time and efforts to be here, but we've only had one person bring that forward. So I think that there's an opportunity to educate our community and explain what this is and how it works and how they can be involved and what that looks like, and change is hard,
Right,
but there's a lot of really exciting things that are included in this, and I think that's, you know, a good place to move forward.
right.
Yeah, I guess, so earlier we had talked about the, you know, hey, there's the accessory unit policy that's being changed here,
Yeah.
the ADUs, and we said, hey, the city code trumps this one, but we're like, hey, maybe we should change ours now,
Yeah.
and they can just delete theirs.
Yeah,
I mean, is that something we wanna do right now, or is that something we could just recommend?
I think we should
Make
make any
room.
changes we want to now, just as we did with the conditional use permit. So that it's as we want it when we move forward, before we move forward with any final recommendations for the ordinance.
Got it.
So
Dave,
do
are you
have-
talking about making recommending changes, more changes to the accessory residential unit section?
Yeah, that's just one section that
I really can't hear you, Dave. I'm sorry.
okay,
So I will rely on Jordan.
Yes, that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
I guess so that one, I guess I did, I am in favor of removing, ADUs. The requirement that it's, only for long-term, use. I'm in favor of allowing short-term use for those. And then,
What page are you on?
yeah, it's gonna be Article 5,
32?
So you want to remove the less than 30-day occupancy? So the B occupancy?
yes, I'm in favor of that. I don't know if everybody else is, but,
I am not. I think the intention, I think that there's a workaround there, that if one is interested in renting and wants that to be something that they do, you could inhabit your ADU and rent your home, because there's not a restriction on that. But the intention here is to provide affordable housing, and if you allow for short-term rental components of that, that commercializes that. And it changes the intended use. And I think that based on how the state has rolled this out, it's not something that's in alignment with what the intention is, and I think we can have it be what we want it to be, but I don't support that.
Right.
Yep.
We have STR, like a short-term rental language, right? And they can go ahead and file for a permit and get that set up as a short-term unit.
But the question is whether or not ADU or an ARU is allowed to be a short-term rental unit
Right.
or the primary dwelling. And so if you allow for both to effectively function as short-term rentals, or for the smaller one of them, whatever it may be, it's a different.
Chair, can I ask a question, please? Amanda, if, just based on what you said, if we have a home and they build an ARU or they have an ARU,
Mhm.
what I think the city's code is the owner could not live in the ARU and rent out the house as an STR because they have two homes on a piece of land. And it's considered an ARU. So if you're gonna have, I'm just asking to clarify. Just
Right.
because they move into the ADU, that would allow
Well-
them the house as an STR?
I did not honestly look at the short-term rental code and necessarily as this does not discuss whether or not you can use the primary dwelling on a property for transient lodging. This just says that you can't use the accessory unit for transient lodging. You may have a separate code in your SDR code that stipulates that your primary dwelling cannot be used for transient lodging. That is up to the city council under that separate ordinance. This ordinance does not discuss how the primary building is used. It does it does do a deed restriction that is specifying that the second dwelling unit is specifically an accessory residential unit. And that is so that you don't use it as a justification for later land division. So you don't end up with lots that are way substandard based on the fact that you've built a detached second unit and then try to divide it. But that is not intended to be anything as far as who's living in which unit. That doesn't really have any applicability there. Dave, you were talking about removing parking, right? So F, which is the minimum of 2 parking spaces. Would you like to remove that wholesale or would you like to reduce it to 1?
2 parking spaces required for the total primary dwelling unit and the ARU. So is that 2 total or is that 2?
Total, required total for the primary dwelling and ARU, which would be 1 per unit, basically.
Okay, yeah, that I guess I'm fine with. I guess I read that wrong initially, thinking it was 2 for the unit.
It's just they have to have 2 parking spaces off-site. They can both be for this primary dwelling and none for the ARU, or both be used for the ARU and none for the primary. I guess it depends on how they want to do that on their own. But in either way, they have to have 2 spaces. That's actually not bad.
Yeah, I guess,
Typically, most homes have 2 parking spaces already.
yeah, I guess the transient lodging thing, like the way that I think about it is like, well, we are in the process of building something for my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
But then, maybe 10 years from now or 20 years from now, if she's not using it anymore, like, hey, we might want to have some family come stay for a little bit, but then also what happens when they're not using it? It's like, well, I don't want to tie it up with a rental, but then I want the option to, PCT days is coming along. All right, let me rent it out for PCT days and make some extra money. That's where I'm just like, I can see the side of it as a, somebody who wants to leave a unit maybe for their parents that are going to come visit to watch their kids occasionally. All right, they come and visit. Well, it's not being used the rest of the year when they're not visiting. Well, might as well make some more income for the local families that do have, hey, you can put this unit in, you can have a place to stay. My brother's house in San Diego has a unit in the back. And originally they bought the house and rented that out. And then they actually switched when they moved into that one and rented the house out. But it just seems like it gives more income opportunities to the families here.
But were those both long-term rentals?
Those were short-term Airbnbs.
So
Or
they-
that he did. He just had Airbnbs. But he still lived there. So it wasn't taking away housing from. There was still housing there, long-term housing, but it was just a second one that was more flexible to be rented out, or, he also had the option to use it for a long-term rental as
Yeah.
well. He had all the options.
So the other thing that I would say, and the context I have for this is, what I used to enforce on short-term rentals, and there's programming out there that monitors this, and one of the workarounds outside of maybe what I'd explained is a 31-day or more rental, where it's not identified as short-term, but it's long-term in that capacity, and so you get 12 of them a year. But for what you're describing, that might fit your need. And you can advertise on Airbnb and other places with that caveat that it be a 31-day or more rental. And then the details of that you can figure out, but it gives you a path to that while still eliminating that quick turnaround. I think this is really important, and I think that we should vote on it if we're done talking or when we're done talking.
I want to make a recommendation, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. based on the conversation and the fact that the city has a separate policy on short-term rentals, what I would actually recommend is that you remove B entirely. So that the occupancy standard that says that it shall not be used for transient lodging just get removed, eliminate it, and have the ordinance that is separate that the council has adopted on short-term rentals be the standalone ordinance that determines whether or not you can use it as a short-term rental. And then have a community conversation over what that ordinance should say. Rather than trying to having them duplicative, because if we remove this occupancy line right now, then the short-term rental one is the only one that applies, and you can have that conversation and just determine what you want it to be, rather than having them both apply.
And the short-term rental ordinance as it exists right now would automatically be applicable to this new zone.
Mhm.
Okay.
So it's
And
just an option, because basically what we're removing is it's like taking noise out of the code. We're just going to remove that and let something else actually be the standing ordinance for it.
And if you had a long-term rental, I mean, like your mother-in-law named you in, until she, her life is over. So, and that's okay, because we don't have this in here.
Yeah. Dave, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think the city code and that way it can be changed at any moment by the council without having to do a whole plan review.
Well, not at any moment, but easier than this.
Yeah.
Do you wanna make a motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we take out, let's see, section B and article 5 under accessory residential units. And we also, is that it? Just yep. Just remove B.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it, but I have a question for Kathy.
Okay.
How many parking spots do we have for Airbnb?
For
Say-
short-term rentals,
Yeah, short-term,
it's based on how many bedrooms, so
Oh,
it's,
okay.
it's
but there is.
for every so many bedrooms, it's one or something. But this is the same that's in the current municipal ordinance. 2.
Two, yeah, two, right.
I'm good. I got nothing.
Motion and second, any more discussion? Let's vote.
I,
Right?
Aye. Okay, I'm through with that, I recommend removal. Any additional deliberation?
I mean, I guess the only other thing is the parking for the mobile food carts. And I do think there should be something in the policy to you know, make it so then we don't take away off-street parking or don't take away street parking from the rest of the community
For that.
for that.
Kathy, are there commercial? Let's see, that's not what I want. What would you propose, Dave?
I mean, that's so hard because I'm like. It's almost like there should be a parking requirement on the seating area that they have. I feel like the temporary stop and go, let's say you have somebody working it, which would be one parking space. And then you have somebody stop and going, which that I'm like, okay, if that's like an on-street parking spot, that doesn't, you know, that's fine. But then it's what happens if there's a large seating area that then is
Calculated more like a restaurant.
calculated more like a restaurant, because I can see if there's these metal structures, well, hey, I'm just gonna put 10 metal structures up, put a bunch of seats in them, put some heat lamps in
I
there.
think that would have a different
That's-
intention than the one stop and go.
Yeah, that's no longer a, you know, now you just made something without any parking requirements, because you don't have
Still
any.
assuming the 3 or less pod unit that doesn't trigger a larger review, is that what you're
Let's see,
thinking?
the 3 or less unit, even if that would trigger the review, then how would that be any different than, I mean, then it's the 1,000 per square feet. Under the code, right? So,
Well, let me just ask a question, because we're gonna have to determine this. with the vendor permit. So, okay, let's look at the two that we have currently. So there's the coffee shop down here. Currently, parking is not an issue
Right.
on that particular piece of property. The other unit that we have, parking would be a problem. So are you going to, council wants street vendors. I just think that, you know, you need to think about the single vendor, because you can require the parking in the pod. You're gonna look at all that stuff.
And that's.
But for the
your-
single, yes, but for the single vendor, I would just like it made clear for us to be able to regulate it. If you're talking about a single vendor, you can look at your
agree.
situation and figure out how you could make that happen.
Yeah, I guess
I
there's,
agree.
that lot is, you know, it's a substantially sized lot, right? Cause that includes the hotel. You know, there is parking there
For the motel.
for the motel, but then there's also the trailer park, and I don't even know what all is there. I mean, it kind of goes back, but
It's a
I'm
big
like,
lot, yeah.
I'm like, well, is there parking somewhere on their lot that they could set aside for, hey, this is for the food cart vendors, staff, so the, you know, the staff has a place to park. I mean, I can just, I'm just thinking, you know, there's that one, which is like, all right, is there some parking? I know there's like kind of, I mean, I don't know the whole area, like, you know.
I think if you have to get this specific on this, you're not going to be able to do this with clear and objective standards, the way that you're talking, Dave. I think my recommendation would be that you not apply any parking requirements at this time and come back and add parking if you determine it to be a problem. But you're going to have to figure out a mechanism of doing it clear and objective. It can't just be, well, if you can find a parking space on site somewhere that you can identify, that's fine. That's not a clear and objective standard. So it's going to take some experience with this in order to figure out whether or not you actually need parking for them, I think.
And we're already sending ARU and STR verbiage to council to make an ordinance. This could be something that we can have a quicker response time to it when it becomes a problem.
Mhm.
And then planning commission can then look at it and see and reassess, because what happens if we get a few pods on the east side of town by the coffee shop? That'll pull parking over there, that'll pull people away from the crowded cluster downtown and park over there, and maybe they'll decide to walk from over there. Best case scenario, right? Not necessarily what will happen, but we can watch what happens as the food cart situation grows. If we need a quick response, council has the potential to be able to react and respond to that, and then we'll get the chance to sit down and look at it.
I mean, I guess.
What's gonna trigger that though? What triggers it to come back to council?
Yeah, I mean, that would be somebody building
Well,
something.
a complaint wouldn't necessarily do that, because if you condition an approval, then that's the threshold. You can't change the benchmark once you've established it, right? So you tell someone they get to do this, you can't come back and say it's psych, you have to do something different unless there's a trigger that says you need to reapply every year and then you're subject to those new standards.
They do have to.
We do have that.
They do have to apply every year and they are subject to whatever standards are applied, so.
So do we add that now or do we add that later? What's that look like, right? Right.
Yeah, the 1 year application is actually already in the code, so anything you approve, you'd only be approving for a year.
And there's no superseding that specific piece with this language.
If the person got a permit on January 1 and the council changed their mind and wanted to add additional requirements on February 1, those new requirements would not be applicable to that particular tenant, the mobile unit, until the next January. But otherwise, they would still have to apply to them in the next January. They'd get a year pass. So the longest you'd have somebody out of compliance with that standard would be a year.
How do you feel about that, Dave? The wait and see.
Yeah, I guess that works. I mean, I guess let's just, okay, so let's just do a scenario. The hikers next to us have hey, we're gonna put in 2 food carts right there.
Okay,
Alright, no, not a pod, doesn't trigger it.
Yeah.
Let's put in 8 of these little shed units and put a bunch of tables and chairs under there. You know. Then it's like, okay, well, that doesn't trigger anything from the building code standpoint, because they're little just sheds.
but even if it was a restaurant, would you be more than 1,000 square feet? Right, like if you're using the new parking standards for that
Yeah,
and you're up to 1,000. Then what would that calculation be for that space you're thinking through? Do you know what I mean? Cause it's a large
Yeah.
space, right? So like they may still only require 1 spot.
yeah,
And
Yeah,
so.
and I think that actually would trigger a building permit and probably site design review if you actually put covers like that, because the building code would no longer exempt them if there are that many of them, and particularly if they were connected. So there, if they were just doing tents and canvas, you're right, Dave, they would probably get away with it for a little while, and then you would have to determine whether or not that was actually attracting enough people to make that possible. But if they put up hard structures, I think the building code would eventually get triggered. You can only get 200 square feet of patio cover without a permit.
so I guess I them am concerned about the 1 per 1,000 for the downtown zone, because then. It does make it to where the standards for restaurants, we
Yeah.
used to have the code that broke it up, so like apartment buildings are one thing. But then having the restaurant code, that's where I'm getting nervous, where it's like, hey. Now we're starting to get into some really low numbers. For anything that, you know, it's like the fire hall that was renovated. And had, you know, there is space on the lot to put parking. But, you know, it's like, oh, well, we're not gonna put any parking, because we only have to have 1 parking space now, or 2 parking spaces. It's just I wanna just make sure that there is a plan for the parking. So we don't end up with a situation where everybody in the town, in the neighborhood, is even more pissed off on our side of town, because. Well, we lower the standards even further.
Well. And also, I mean, just a hypothetical scenario here, if. If there was a food cart and they were taking up a little bit more space than we were comfortable giving, and there was a conversation had with them. And they didn't feel like they needed to play fair, their permit's up in a year. It's up to the city to decide if they want to continue to allow them to sit there, whether or not they. Want to adhere to our rules and our requests.
Do we have like a 3 strikes you're out policy in there?
It's never been an issue till now. I mean, this is all new for us. I mean, it's not new for everybody else, but we're learning.
Dave, I would tell you that everybody comes to get their mail and there wasn't a parking spot, they're all gonna be pissed off.
Yeah.
No, I honestly, I hope you have these problems. I will be excited for you if this is actually something you're coming back in a year and saying, oh my God, we're having so many food carts, we need to change this ordinance. That would be wonderful.
I would say help the city invest in public off-street parking and problem solved.
Oh, so.
Just give me some money and I can fix it. All of you, not just you, all of you.
Wait, that's thoughts to right now.
Yeah.
Or ruin your food so it's not so dang good.
No, it's the beer.
Okay, good discussion. Anything else that people would like to bring forward?
I have one thing from the very front page. You said that the city council's gonna look at this June 10th. That's my anniversary and that's a Tuesday. So the city.
I think that was
You do it on that date, sorry.
Yeah, it's a Monday is the 9th because my grandson's graduating from high school that night.
I think at this point, we're probably not gonna get in front of council until the 26th, 23rd, that 4th Monday in June.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So change the date.
yeah,
Okay.
because we still have to give 30-day notice, correct, Amanda? Yeah, so we're looking at the 23rd. Yeah,
Third of.
Feel better? Is that better?
Okay. So I think we're at a point where we can entertain. Motions to move forward with. Do you anticipate, do we have to do them all separate or can we do them all together?
You can do them all together. Just make sure you reference within that motion the two other motions that were adopted during this meeting. Just by reference is fine. And again, it's a recommendation to council that they consider approval of these 4 ordinances.
So I will entertain a motion to recommend the city council adopt the attached ordinances in their entirety, including the 2 amendments that were proposed today.
So if I don't have to say that again, I'll say, I so move.
Okay,
Yeah.
but we probably should wait.
We will.
Okay, I just didn't want her to make the motion.
Should we be definite about the 2 amendments or
They're of record.
specifically or not?
Those motions include adding childcare facilities as conditional uses in the downtown commercial and commercial residential areas, and
Right.
removing 8-6.165.020.b, which is the accessory residential unit standards for occupancy.
Should that be part of the motion?
It is now part of the motion.
And by. and
We don't gotta be
by
that
I
efficient.
Recommend this be passed on to city council.
Okay, we entertain a motion and to accept all as presented with the 2 amendments. We have a first. And it's waiting for a second, waiting for you.
Just to clarify, the 2 amendments for the daycare
Yep,
and the removal of the area verbiage.
exactly.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, any discussion? Right, let's move to vote. Dave?
Good night.
I,
Aye. Motion passes.
Woot woot.
Woo.
Yay! Well done, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you all. I don't know if there's anything else on the agenda, but it was a pleasure.
Public comment, and then that's it. You
You
are free to go though, Amanda.
Okay. Goodbye, all. I'll see you next month. Okay.
Oh, that, I don't know why that's on there, but no.
Yeah, but you.
I didn't know if it was gonna get better feel. Okay, so with that, we'll close the meeting.
Public comment.
Public comment?
Any general public comment?
General public comment, thank you.
I came, and we both were there.
Is this a public comment?
Yeah, this is public comment
Very
to
good.
city council because, I thought the people that own the 2 houses next door here, somebody would come to our last planning commission meeting to clarify, about what we were all doing with the downtown. And then Jordan, you said the port wants to take it out, the park out of the downtown. And I thought Dave was right. The port wanted to take the park out of the downtown. And so.
Oh, I didn't,
Huh?
yeah.
They withdrew.
No, they were true, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
it's
true.
not official yet, but we're amending the ordinance for council adoption on the 9th.
On the 9th?
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, I thought, Dave,
Well, I didn't
you
know
have
the port wanted
prior
to do it.
information.
I didn't know the port wanted to do that. I thought they wanted to do it.
Yeah, but.
Yeah.
But they
Well-
came that night and said, no, they wanted it in the downtown. They wanted to park in the downtown, and we voted to include it in the downtown because we got the leases from Army Corps of Engineers, blah,
Well,
blah,
and this
blah.
process too, all of that would allow us.
Would allow us
Make
to
it
do-
as we.
Yeah.
need it.
And-
The way it was explained to people was that it was more of a placeholder. They wanted to check their options.
Yep.
And so they just wanted that option to stay open, while they explored that avenue. And then after exploring, they decided to withdraw.
Yeah.
Correct.
So anyway, it was a change. I thought, this guy may be foresighted the future.
Start speaking a little louder, Dave.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
thank you for your public comment. We'll adjourn.
Okay. And Michaela, I just need you to sign these, please.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.